policy on cyclical higher education reviews. And it's situated very much within the relationship between QQI and the providers. And it forms a kind of an overview or an overseeing part of that relationship. The annual institutional quality report is a really important contemporary account of quality assurance within the institution. And in fact, those collated annual reports are the input really to some extent to the periodical review teams. And for us, as Padraig says, at this point, it's really nice to be able to take a moment and reflect a little on what has happened so far and what has been learned. Yes, about the process, but also about the institutions and about that system in Ireland. And I think it's important to say that the landscape for this review cycle has been very dynamic and challenging, and perhaps in higher education it was ever thus. The funding constraints in higher education, the institutional mergers, the technological, economic and societal changes, as well as, I suppose, the really significant pandemic that we're experiencing, they provide the backdrop within which our organisations work and strive to assure quality and to enhance quality. And I think before we begin, it's worth reminding ourselves of the 4 purposes of that CINNTE review cycle. And for me, the first of those, which is to encourage the quality assurance culture and the enhancement of student learning environment and experience across and within an institution, is really important. That idea of the culture, of the way we behave, of our motivation for behaving thus and so on, is very important. And another purpose is to provide feedback to institutions about institution-wide quality and the impact of mission, strategy, governance and management on quality. And that relationship between governance and quality assurance and our strategies and so on is very important, because quality can't be a separate thing that we add on. It has to be threaded through what we do and why we do it and how we do it. And thirdly, a purpose of the review cycle is to contribute to public confidence in the quality of the institutions, promoting transparency, public awareness. And in this climate of news and fake news and all kinds of different news cycles, public confidence in what we do and how we do it is really important. And finally, the purpose of the cycle is to encourage quality by using evidence-based objective methods. And you will, like I, have seen those reports come in from the institutions and be really impressed at the data that's collected, the way that it's used, the positive impetus that there is behind that kind of evidence-based quality assurance. And another thought, I suppose, that I had before this morning was around the process of that review cycle. It's quite a long process, the engagement, the terms of reference, the institutional's self-evaluation report, the desk review, the various meetings and visits that happen, and then the reports, outcomes and follow-up. It's quite a long cycle that we go through, and it's one that really couldn't happen unless it was based on that relationship between the providers and QQI, that relationship of trust, of long-term, mutually assured confidence in that relationship. And something that we've noted in the Approvals and Review Committee is the profile and expertise of the experts on those review panels. And I think it speaks a lot of the, I suppose, the respect in which QQI is held internationally, in Europe and indeed beyond, the kind of experts that they've been able to call on, who've been willing to come and be part of those reviews. So for all of us, those have been, I suppose, very significant features of what has happened in the process. And for us, we've been waiting somewhat anxiously with this report of this mid-cycle review to understand what has happened, to understand how it can contribute to thought for institutions who are moving forward in this process, and how it can contribute to the thinking in QQI for the cycles as we look to the next cycle and so on. But we are conscious that this is very much at an early stage to some extent. This is looking, I think, at the first 7 institutions, so it's not, by any means the complete cycle of the review. And we're also, and always have been, conscious of the variation, and rightly so, the variation, the diversity of our institutions, diversity in terms of size, geography, history, differences in scale and ambition. So we're not looking for this review or for these reports to be in any way standardized or sanitized, to not be meaningful. We're looking for something that will produce some messages for those who are about to go through the process, but respecting that kind of diversity. So we are looking forward, Achim, to your findings with excitement and interest. So just before I introduce Dr. Achim Hopbach, I'd like to just maybe make some practical notes around this morning's webinar. Just for the efficiencies and the ease of listening, we would ask that everyone keeps their microphones off unless they're actually speaking. That just helps to preserve the bandwidth on the channel and to make it easier to listen to. On a practical note, I will very much be keeping to the times on the agenda. We would ask you, there are over 30 people in the meeting, so we would ask you to pose your questions as they occur to you by typing them into the chat channel. And we will endeavour at the opportunities. There's a question and answer session after the first presentation, and there's also a discussion forum after the 2, which I think will also be really valuable input, the presentations from 2 speakers who have been through the process. So we will endeavour to get through as many of those questions as you have today. And indeed, what we don't get through, the chat will provide an important resource as well to consider later for questions that might need to be answered or thought about a little bit more. When we take a break, as is planned in the agenda, you'll be glad to hear, we would ask that you don't disconnect from the meeting. It just makes it easier to come back into it if you simply turn off your microphone, turn off your camera, and then come back at the appointed time. It will make it easier for us all. So with no further ado, and keeping to the time as I've promised, what I would like to do is I would like to introduce Dr. Achim Hopbach, who's a former Managing Director of AQ Austria and the German Accreditation Council, and as Padraig has said, a former President of ENQA. Achim, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much for this kind words, and thank you very much for having me today to share some of the findings of this analysis which I did. What I'm going to do is I will talk very briefly about the review scheme and about the methodology, but then focus on the findings. The CINNTE reviews, and I hope that I pronounce these terms correctly. The CINNTE reviews are about the effectiveness of institution-wide quality assurance procedures. That's very important to bear in mind, that that these reviews have an institutional focus, have a focus on what on what kind of policies and processes the institution applies. It does not have any kind of program focus. What has already been mentioned, the review cycle is a third way through, and it's 7 institutions that this analysis covers. The purpose and the methodology. Well, first of all, I should mention that QQI of course is looking at what impact all their activities are having, and this is on a larger scale. With regard to the CINNTE scheme and with regard to this analysis, the focus was on the key themes and the topics that arose in the review reports. And the focus was also on what we might learn about the sector as such, about the stage of development of internal quality assurance in the sector. A second aspect, which is equally important, that is what the agency can learn from this for further developing their processes and review schemes, will not be in the focus of this presentation. This is something QQI will discuss with you, I guess, at a later stage. With regard to the methodology, this was not a very sophisticated thing. The two main questions are mentioned here, and these were the questions I had to deal with, just to identify the topics and the findings in the 7 reports. But there's one thing which I would like to highlight, and I will come back to that later again, because it's quite important and interesting from my point of view. The only source I had were the 7 reports, so there was no cross-checking with the self-evaluation reports and no cross-checking with the IIQRs, which were already mentioned. I will come back to that later. This is very important to be kept in mind. Now, some of the key findings. First of all, it is very important always to keep in mind that it's only 7 reports. That's a third and of all the relevant institutions, and that's not too many. It is very interesting to get a first impression about what is going on in the reviews, what is coming out of the reviews, but it's only 3. It's only one third. A second thing, which turned out to be very important during my work, is that the reports are quite heterogeneous with regards to the coverage of processes, not so much the policies, but the various processes. This is not a bad thing, but I will come back to that later. But it is important to keep this in mind. This leads to the caveat that that we all have to be very cautious when we try to generalize any of these findings, which I will present. Starting with findings, what was quite interesting is that that the review reports gave quite some information about the self-evaluation which was conducted by the institutions, and I was quite happy about this. This is the first thing I look at when I look at these kinds of reports. Do they give information about the self-assessment? And they were very positive about the self-assessment. They were very positive about the attitude of the institutions towards the review, and they were very positive about the broad involvement and participation at the institutions. This is quite important. Second general finding that there are arrangements in place, and that that the governance on the whole is effective. So in a general, to start with, the overall findings were quite positive. Now going more into detail. The reports were talking about contextual factors, and these are quite interesting. Four things I would like to mention. First of all, that's not very surprising. For many institutions, the economic downturn after 2008 was a very relevant feature, which was discussed in the reviews. A second contextual factor, which was highlighted in most of the reports, put a little bit of a smile on my face, and this is that the institutions were undergoing significant, substantial developments and changes right before the review and after the review. This reminded me of one lesson which I learned in the last 20 years of having been working in this area, and this is that there is not really a good moment of doing a review, an external review. That's always a lot going on, but you will find this in many reports. And then a third thing which I found very interesting, maybe from a continental European point of view. It was frequently highlighted that the role as provider in the region has a huge impact on the teaching provision of the institutions. This was quite new for me, and I found that quite interesting. For those institutions that are located close to the north of the island, the Brexit was mentioned as very important contextual factor. So we see that we can see that there were some factors which were relevant for all the institutions, and others institutions. I already talked about the excuse me, the self-assessment. What was highlighted and I really felt reassured about this kind of review scheme was the broad involvement of many groups and individuals in the self-assessment. And what was also highlighted that in most of the cases the self-evaluation reports formed a very good basis for the external review, which is not always the case. Only in one of the reviews, the panel had to ask for quite a number of additional information. Two institutions were highlighted for having presented case studies, which were highly appreciated by the panel, and it seems that this could be something to be considered by others as well. The panels were quite happy to that they had the opportunity to look deeper into these case studies. So much about the self-assessment. I will now focus on the findings with regards to review objective number 1, which is to review the effectiveness and implementation of the QA procedures of the institution through consideration of the procedures set out primarily in the AIQR. I will mainly focus on on this part of the review reports. Firstly, one comment on the content of the reports. What is very clear is that all the panels focused on the policies and the responsibilities. They focused on the governance. They didn't focus too much on the individual processes and tools. And where they did so, it was not in a very systematic way, which I should highlight is not a problem from my point of view, because it is what we see in many types of reviews which address the institutional level. The panels focused on what they found the most important and relevant aspects, which is what, from my point of view, a panel should do in order to support the institutions, and not just in order to please, I don't know, the agency or some external reader maybe. So one not so surprised at all, which gave me some headache during my work, is that there is not that much detail on individual processes and tools. This made my analysis sometimes a bit difficult, but I think that this is a way to conduct these reviews to support the universities and not the agency, if I may to say so. There is one problem with the topic research. The chapters on research are quite different for the same reason. The panels focused on what seems to be most relevant with regard to research, and these were mainly the framework conditions. These were mainly the profile of the universities in the research area, not so much the quality assurance processes, but because the framework conditions, which I talked about, the scarcity of funding and these things were so relevant, the panels focused on this, which is okay, I would say. Now, one very interesting thing is that the outcomes of the review across these institutions are very similar, very similar. If we take the 11 topics dealt with under this review objective, and then together with research, it's 12. Then the outcomes in most of these are very, very similar, which I found quite quite surprising, I must say. And even if we take those which are not listed here, for example, topic number 4, staff recruitment, management and development, or topic number 6, assessment of learners, it is not a very big difference between these institutions. At a second thought, I realized that this gives quite an important message to the system, to the sector, that although there is a great diversity in terms of tools and processes, they all are effective and efficient to a very high extent, and this is a very important message to the system, to the institutions. So diversity, which is an asset, I would say, because there is not such a thing like a blueprint for having these QA processes and so. That's on the one side, but still they are on a whole very effective and efficient. This is very reassuring at a system level, I would say. Once again, I should say that that the reports focus on the policies and on the governance, and also it is crystal clear that in terms of areas of activity, the reports focus on learning and teaching. It's not so much research. This is quite important to keep in mind. The agency might have thoughts on this, but this is clear. It is about learning and teaching. It is about the policies and the governance. Although the outcomes in general are very positive, there are 3 topics which I found in almost every report. The efficiency of governance structures, and this means the cascades of bodies, units, and so on below the top level. In some of the there was a clear indication that the institutions should reconsider the number and the position of these bodies and units, and that they need to take care about the communication between these bodies. The second topic, which is not surprising at all, I would say you would find this in most of institutional review reports in other countries as well, is the maintenance of the sets of policies or the whole system. This might be a problem mainly in those institutions which put a lot of effort in designing policies for whatever reason, for whatever problem, and the sheer number of policies made the panels concerned about the way the institutions can take care of the review of these policies. And the third recurring topic that's also pretty clear is the consistent implementation across the institution. This is not a problem of the Irish institutions. This is the issue which I think we find in most of the systems, but it was clearly flagged in all the reports. Now, one core topic obviously is support for learners, which stands for all the topics that refer to the learning experience. This was mainly a topic where inconsistent implementation was highlighted as a problem. What has been highlighted by the panels, though, is that the institutions were very strong in collecting feedback from the students and in reviewing support schemes. This was quite important and highlighted by the panel. What I found very interesting, I must say, is that that many of the institutions and also the panels highlighted the role of online provision as a means to enhance quality of the teaching, of the learning experience. And keep in mind that these reviews were conducted before the COVID crisis. So that's quite interesting that this was considered of enhancing the quality almost across all the procedures. All in all, this the chapters around learning and teaching gave a very clear picture about effectiveness and of the policies, while having some inconsistencies, and they also gave a clear picture about the great variety of tools which were used. One topic where the institutions didn't come out so well is in information and data management. This was, if I may say, the topic which I found the easiest to deal with. The information was quite short, but very clear. Some of the institutions have comprehensive and proper systems in place, but they will not be the ones to be used in the future. Others already today have systems in the place which are not so sufficient. This seemed to be very clear across all the institutions that information and data management is an issue which the institutions need to take care of. Interestingly, for a continental European is the relevant of the national student survey, which in many continental European countries you wouldn't find. And this was quite reassuring that this data is used by the institutions, is widely used by the institutions. This was a little bit of a contrast to the last finding, which is mentioned here, is that although the institutions collect a lot of data, they are not as good as they are not that good in channeling these data and information to the management and in forming management decisions. This was sometimes maybe a little bit between the lines, but it was crystal clear that the panels were not really convinced that information and data management is a strength of the institutions. Mm-hmm. This is also true when it comes to the topic other parties involved in education and training. This was quite interesting because the feedback they received from the partners was quite positive, but what they analyzed in terms of the processes of the policies they saw in the self-evaluation reports, that was not so impressive. So it seems that the panels felt that maybe the institutions had good, working partnerships, but maybe they didn't know why they are working that well. So in this area, some more professionalization seems to be important in the future. Now, I already mentioned research briefly. These chapters really look different. The panels were very interested in the research profiles, in where the institutions are heading to, and of course what the financial constraints meant to the research activities, and they focus on these topics. In the institutions of technology, there is a second aspect which played a major role here, and that's the absence of co-funding and the teaching load. And interestingly, this is one of the very interesting findings of this analysis. This is the only point where you can really make a substantial difference between the universities and the institutes of technology. I always try to find differences between these two types, and there weren't any significant. This is a significant difference. Interestingly, though, this difference does not translate into differences when it comes to the quality assurance processes in research. It is still true when it comes to the governance and to the supportive bodies or units like research offices or so, which you don't find that many in the institutes of technology. But when it comes to the QA processes, there is a similarity again. So this is quite interesting, that that when it comes to research output, they are still on their way, and the institutional underpinning is not that good as it is in the universities, which might be clear since this is still a younger sector. But at the operational level in quality assurance, they are quite similar. What is, however, evaluated in a very positive way by all the panels is how the institutions deal with PhD programs. This was highlighted as being very good. A lot of support schemes in a big variety, allocation of two supervisors, and all these things. I don't want to go too much into detail. This was clearly a strength there. There was only one a problem at an institution which had implemented the PhD program only recently, and this didn't work too well. Now I want to talk very briefly about review objective number 3, effectiveness and implementation of procedures for access, transfer, and progression, because this is very interesting. Different from many of these kinds of review schemes in continental Europe, this topic plays a major role, or a very important role, in the reviews, and it is not only because it is high on the political agenda, but because the institutions are very much engaged in this field and have a lot to present in this field, which is not the case in many countries that I know. The institutions have well-working schemes for specific target groups, which I mentioned here. The mature students, first generation higher education learners, and this seems to be at a much higher level than in many countries which I know. I would have loved to learn more about this in the self-evaluation reports, which I didn't know, of course. This was a very quick run through some of the findings. Some concluding remarks. What I learned during the analysis is that it is extremely important to consider the CINNTE review within context. It is not the only activity of QQI, and there seem to be, or I'm pretty sure there are a lot of links between the various activities, and it is maybe not even possible to analyze the impact of one of these review activities without taking into account the others. This is not specific for Ireland and QQI, but a trend which you find everywhere in Europe. And this brings me to the last point mentioned on this slide. The reviews might be, or the review reports might be more beneficial to the institutions than to the outer world, for the agency or any external reader. If we take them separately, if taken as one component of the entire activity of the agencies, they might also be more relevant for others. This is very important. QQI might give it a thought for designing future analysis, maybe. And as already mentioned, the focus on policies is not a bad thing. I would say this is what helps the institutions. It is not so relevant for them to have tons of information of each and every tool, but to have to receive feedback on whether they have a proper policy in place to review their tools and so on and so on. The overall positive evaluation, they resemble those in other countries. I would say. In general, the institutions are quite good at policy level. There are some problems with consistency that you find everywhere. This was very briefly some insights into this analysis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Achim. Yes, it has been a brief, and it's difficult to, I presume, to condense all of the complex findings into something as brief. But you've done a really good job, and I'm sure posed a lot of questions for us. What we have at the moment is we've a couple of questions in the chat that I think might be questions more for QQI than for you, but we will put them in any case. What we have is one question about whether the results of the review will be used to reframe the training for external review panels, and if so, what will be the key messages? And what changes would we expect to see? And I'm not sure that that entirely is the intention or the purpose of what you were undertaking, but it might be for somebody, for Marie perhaps, to come in and give us a word on that, or maybe Padraig also.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in that, Irene. I think Achim had outlined in the scope, I suppose, at the outset, that the review of the process was not so much in scope. It was very much a thematic review of the report. In saying that, of course, the recommendations and the observations very much inform our thinking for the next phase of the reviews. And indeed, I mean, the reviewer team training is something that we work on continually. We get feedback from every review team, Maureen and I will go through and tweak. I suppose what strikes me in particular is the research and the quality assurance infrastructure around the research, which has been picked up by a number of the review teams. And it's something that we may, I suppose, be inclined to highlight more with review teams going forward. I think the context piece is really important, and we emphasize that very much. So it's the whole, it's all of the elements. It's not just this, it's not the CINNTE review in isolation. But when we emphasize that currently with review teams, so the role of the formerly annual institutional quality report, and we've done significant work with the sector on that report, and I think that's become even more valuable, I suppose, in the process going forward. And we have embedded the follow-up report to CINNTE within that. So I suppose it keeps the review live in that way. So I suppose, you know, it's an ongoing process, and I'm not sure you'll see dramatic changes in the reports going forward. But as perhaps from the institution's perspective, you know, more synergy between the various elements, that may be certainly more explicit, and more utilization, I suppose, of the various elements. So the CINNTE, when it's done, doesn't stand alone, that it remains live, that the objectives and the recommendations are carried forward through that annual evaluation and reporting process. Padraig may wish to come in. Just to thank Achim, I think it was a super presentation, and not easy, you know, to put all this together. And we take the point about the perhaps more detailed analysis incorporating the AIQR and the ICERs, and it's something we look at, that maybe that's the next phase of this, because it really is important to you know, to continually get the oversight, and I suppose this perspective, the external perspective in the process has been really valuable for us. Padraig may wish to.
Thanks very much, Marie. Yes, Padraig, would you like to come in there? Sorry, Padraig, your microphone is muted.
Sorry, initially I was just going to ask Marie to respond, because she's made the point that we have adapted the training after every review, and that there are a number of other issues that came up previously. Things like, you know, how universities place their awards on the framework. The process for that was something that we wanted to highlight. The challenge, of course, is that we have to evaluate all institutions against the same framework, that we can't change the framework over the period of time. However, we would be doing people a disservice if there were things we learned along the way that we didn't adjust as we went along. And certainly some of the outputs that Achim has come through. I think the fact that we have a published piece of research will help. The whole issue of how research has been covered in this process has come up before, and I think it will actually help for the institutions to see that. I'm going to have to go, but just to thank Achim. I may be able to come back before you're finished, depending on how long my other meeting goes. So just thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Achim, you wanted to come in there as well.
Yes, just one sentence on the training. I think one message for the training seminars might be that the panels should keep this kind of focus. If you looked at the QQI handbooks, they might be tempted to go much more on the process and tools level, but they shouldn't. This would, from my point of view, the most important message to keep this focus on the policy level, which seven reports.
Thank you. Thank you. We lost you for a moment there, but we got the idea. I think we can see that from a QQI perspective, the process is undergoing continual improvement. So there are, you know, slight changes to the training that happens because we learn from each of these. So we don't expect a large change, I think, is the answer to the question, but certainly very open to whatever learning that we find. The other question that we have really, and again, it's interesting because the relationship between the annual institutional quality reviews and this cycle of review is important. And in a way, at an institution, it can be difficult to kind of come to terms with what each one is looking for. But there is a question there, or maybe more a comment there, which is around the annual institution quality reviews having really had a significant input into preparing for the institutional review, but they might also be the reason that the findings are so uniform from the various panels. And I think, you know, maybe what you're saying, Achim, is that keeping the institutional review focus at a policy and that sort of level, and maybe looking at the annual reviews to look more at the detail around the individual tools and what's happening on the ground might be a good balance there from an institutional perspective. So I'll just move on. There's a question there, which is about. Yeah, please come in.
Very briefly, it's not that the AI QQRs were important for the self-assessment. Also the panels looked at them. So there is already this link, and this could be made more explicit maybe, which would even help the panel to focus more on policies.
Great, thank you. I think that's a very good point. There's another question there that I will put you, which talks about the difference, I suppose, aspects of quality assurance here, the strong externality, which pervades all aspects of quality assurance here versus what happens in Europe, contributes to the similarities across the sector. Are there observations on this by the panels? And are there aspects of this which are considered to make a systemic divergence in the form of innovation more difficult? So are we being kept on this track and not quite able to break out of it, I think is perhaps what's being asked there by my colleague.
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, this will definitely give me some food for thought after this session, but spontaneously. Wow. No, I don't think that I saw anything which I found odd, to put it like this from the continental European perspective. I would rather say, on the contrary, what I felt very positive about was, but that's only my view, having seen such a small part of the whole system, is the level of flexibility that the institutions seem to have. There are, you know, on the continent, there are quite many systems which much tougher regulatory approaches. And well, your country shouldn't follow that route. I would say based on your tradition. But there were no odd corners also. No, definitely not. No.
That's interesting, and as you say, it might be a question that we can ponder a little after this. It's hard to have something posed like that. Looking for an immediate response, I think it'll take a little bit of time to think about it. But it is good to hear that the flexibility and the diversity that you also mentioned in our system, you know, are rich and present and supported by this kind of a process. So that's always very good to hear. So I don't have any other questions. If anybody would like to raise a hand, please come in.
Sorry,
Yes.
could I add one thing? Of course, this problem that external QA might challenge innovation in the EA institutions is a problem that has to be discussed everywhere. I would be it would be interesting to have such a discussion in the Irish context in comparison to some of the countries which I know much better here, for example, France or the German-speaking countries, because in these countries this is a very relevant problem, which I think, and I had the impression that in the Irish system, it might not be such a problem, but because of this great diversity and more flexibility, if this is still a significant problem in Ireland, then it would be very interesting to learn more about what exactly might stifle, innovation, because the Irish system might be, from my point of view, on the lucky side, I would say. Well, that's an interesting question, I think.
Thank you, Achim. I'm going to ask Brian Maguire maybe to speak there as well.
Yeah, well, just on this topic, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Okay. On this topic of innovation, particularly at the program level, one element of externality we have, and the QQI has been very involved in recent years, is in those programs leading to regulated occupations, where there is another externality that produces a significant convergence, and maybe in some cases uniformity. And in fact, one of the thrusts of the work that indeed Mairead Boland has been leading out on in terms of trying to get a common understanding of how the expectations that professional regulators have of academic programs can be framed in ways and use processes that don't actually stifle innovation within those disciplines, that enhance innovation, while at the same time satisfying the public protection elements, which are key, of course, to occupation regulation. But and indeed, this is a very live issue, as you know, at the moment, for example, in adaptations to COVID in professionally regulated programs, where the hard edge of regulation for programs, which, as Achim says, is more common in other jurisdictions, but for us, we do have it for these programs. And I think it's having both the institutions and QQI and the regulators in the room together is one of the ways in which we can ensure that there isn't a stifling in those areas.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian. I wasn't sure if the question referred to stifling of innovation in terms of programs or in terms of system divergence. So it's just, I mean, and I don't think the question is saying that there is such stifling, but just that there may be elements. I'm going to abuse my position as chair now and ask a question myself, since there aren't any more in the chat. Achim, I'm wondering if you felt in the reports that you've read so far that there was any sense of a criticism of us as providers, in that we tend to respond to external requirements in terms of our quality assurance activities, rather than have a really deeply held, internally driven culture. So I'm just wondering if you sensed any criticism of that in the reports.
Yes, but I did sense something like this, but only in one report, where it was even made quite explicit by the panel. But it was only in one report. The other reports, not really, not at all, I would say.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. It was something that I was, I suppose, sensitive to and looking out for as I read the reports, because there can be a sense, I think, at an institution that you have review after review from professional bodies and from the pay purse holder and the awards authorities and so on. So it can be, maybe it feels sometimes like a little bit like one is on a cycle and responding rather than driving from inside. So it's just interesting that you didn't. Yes, no, exactly. So that questioner has clarified that the question was more about whether the system divergence was being stifled, and it wasn't. It's just a broad question. It just wondering whether it had appeared in the reports. So there's another question in from Roisin Smith, which looks at Ireland doesn't have a national set of quality indicators metrics that all HEIs report on, unlike the UK and other jurisdictions. And might this have contributed to your findings in the information management and data section? And that is an interesting section because it was one which was actually, found that we were a little bit challenged in terms of what we do. So I wonder, Achim, if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I don't think that this was the background against which the panels had some more reservations. It was more that that the data that is that the internal data and information that is collected was not made good use of. This was more the problem. Not that there would be insufficient data at national level. On the contrary, the panels felt very positive about how the national data coming from the student survey was used. But on the other hand, this might be that the institutions would do a better job in using other kind of national data as well. But this would not how should I put it? This would not change the assessment that there is a lot of internal data and that they collect the data, but they don't process the data, that they don't make proper use of the data.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. It's always a balance between having a set of indicators that one must respond to, which makes sure that each element is considered consistently, and trying to balance that with, a richness and diversity, and making sure that it isn't a tick box exercise where I've met a particular indicator, but rather a richer, more internalized, I suppose, approach to quality assurance. So it can be difficult to balance that. So I think that if it's okay, what we might do is take a coffee break at this point. What I would suggest is that we just turn off our cameras and microphones and have coffee and chocolate or whatever else one has afforded oneself this morning, and return promptly at 11:30. I'm really looking forward to the contributions by Aisling McKenna and Brendan Ryder. I think those will be very helpful as well for the rest of us. So thanks very much, Achim. At the end, at the discussion piece, I will ask people again, maybe to come back and pose questions for you. And maybe I'll ask you if we have a minute at the very end for you to summarize, so you can be thinking about that while you're having your coffee. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Irene. Thanks, Achim.
Hi, Irene.
Hi, Mairead. Are you happy with the progress so far?
Absolutely perfect. Yeah, and perfectly within time. Impeccable timing. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Mairead. Thank you. Well, it's good. I think when you have an agenda, people expect it to be like that.
Yeah.
Well, I do anyway.
I hope you enjoyed the chocolate.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I'm a great one for the coffee and chocolate in the morning. I think it's wakes me up. Marie, how are you?
How are you, Irene?
Good. I'm glad it's Friday, I have to say.
I know, absolutely. I think we all are, but a very interesting session to be ending the week on. So thank you.
No, it's been great, and I think there's I think a lot of food for thought in the way Achim presented it.
Yeah, absolutely. Has it gotten cold where you are, Achim? You've appeared with a scarf on. Is it cold there today?
No, not at all. And we are quite lucky that it's not so cold in Vienna because since yesterday morning it's raining. It's pouring down since more than 24 hours now.
Okay.
And if that all would have come down as snow, oh my goodness.
And actually in Ireland today it's a beautiful day. So, normally we would say it's raining and pouring down, but not today, thankfully.
No, we're looking out at sunshine here in Cork as well. Yeah.
And very mild.
Yes. Yesterday I had a conference call with a colleague from Lithuania. They have 40 centimeters of snow. Oh my goodness.
So they are.
She told me that they haven't had something like this since 30 years or so.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, no, that's.
So they are housebound and locked down anyway. It doesn't make that much difference to like I said, the
snow day wouldn't help, Marie. We're still we're here anyway.
And how are things in Vienna, Achim? Is everything open as normal, or
No, we are in a lockdown since Christmas.
Similar then, yeah. Okay.
So the supermarkets are open, but that's it.
Yeah.
And it's scheduled until next week, Sunday, I think.
Okay.
But the numbers, they are not like they should be.
It's been difficult everywhere.
Yeah.
So in 1 or 2 more minutes, Mairead, you give me the nod when you want to start again.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll get another couple of minutes, but
yeah.
We just check if Aisling and Brendan are back from the break.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Hi.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm here as well. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, shall we kick off again then?
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We're going to restart the proceedings now, and we're going to have what I think is again a really valuable part of the morning session, which is the institutional perspective. So we're going to get the experiences of 2 institutions who've undergone the process, and to, I suppose, hear from them their experiences and whether or not their views align with what they've heard around the report. And we also want the exam notes for the rest of us who haven't been through the process, the hints and tips. or anything you can tell us that adds to what's already, I suppose, published in the public domain that would help us out in terms of thinking about the process and preparing. There are institutions who are preparing for this process as we speak. So in this session, we have about 40 minutes. So I'll just ask each of the speakers to stick to 20 minutes or under, and to police themselves. Each of the speakers will take charge of the screen and share their presentation. And as I understand it, those presentations will be available to the attendees after the event. So what I'd like to do first is introduce Aisling McKenna from DCU. Aisling is the Director of Quality Promotion and Institutional Research in DCU. So Aisling, over to you.
Hi there. Good morning, everyone. Can I check that you can see my screen?
Yes.
First of all, with the slides on it. I'm just trying to get into mode now. Am I in preview mode or full screen mode at the moment?
You're in full screen mode. We can see it fine, Aisling.
Oh, fantastic. That's fantastic. I've got two screens here and sometimes it shares the wrong one. So thank you very much for your time this morning. I really enjoyed the session earlier this morning, in a way, getting to relive some of the experiences that I would have gone through as the coordinating individual from DCU in relation to our CINNTE institutional review, and certainly I would see DCU in many of the conclusions which from Achim's report, and they are, I suppose, there's a certain truth in them, and in thinking about the thematic report, I wanted to know two areas in particular that I think I might be able to contribute to. One is the broad satisfaction with self-evaluation, which Achim's report notes, and has been noted by peer review groups, and is to me a fundamental and perhaps the most important aspect of the CINNTE review cycle. And I want to talk a little bit about why I think that's important. And also then about some of the contributing factors to that variability which Achim mentioned this morning, and the divergence in recommendations. And I think that can be at least partly explained by variability in terms of approaches to self-evaluation by institutions. So in terms of my overview this morning, this just has clicked on, I'd like to look at just very quickly at what I perceive to be the value of an effective self-evaluation. Also what I consider on reflection to be one of the main beneficial elements of the CINNTE review process, which is to engage with the peer review team as an opportunity for institutional enhancement and to frame the discussions in that way. And then lastly, about review outcomes. So the review report, but what happens next and when do those things happen? So just very quickly, and I don't want to draw on this, it has been noted this morning that the process of engaging with CINNTE is a long one. And if I think about the three phases that DCU underwent as part of this, I kind of split it into three sections. One being self-assessment, the peer review visit and the arrangements around that, so the formal element of the review, and then the receipt of the report and the development of our response to that report as being the third one. And you can see there that we would have started at the very end of 2017. So December 2017 into January 2018 with our self-assessment process, which really took the guts of 7 months to complete, between the collection of evidence, the reflection, the writing, and the internal approval for the report prior to submission with QQI. There then followed very shortly after that very deep engagement with QQI with regards to the preparations for the visit, right up until the completion of the peer review visit, which was at the end of October 2018. And then we all waited for the final report to be received, the draft report, which came to us relatively quickly at the start of February 2019. And then there was a process of finalization of the report, the publication of the report, and then starting to think about how we wanted to respond to the recommendations. And that process really has been ongoing since then, what you're going to do about a recommendation will not crystallize itself within, I believe, 4 to 6 weeks of receiving your report or it being published. And I just want to talk a little bit about that as well as part of my comments today. So whenever we started self-assessment, and I want to go back to why I believe that is the most important thing, the first thing that we actually did was to develop a whole set of principles, quite broad principles, on which our self-assessment process would be based. And these are documented and these are paraphrased from our self-assessment report. We wanted a process that was open, transparent, and inclusive of a range of views and perspectives, and not just the cheerleaders for quality assurance within our organizations. That as a steering group that was guiding the process institutionally, we would embed critical self-reflection right throughout the process. We hoped that the process would be evidence informed. I'll say a little bit about that as well. And we sought to get the views of 3 key stakeholder groups: staff, students, and finally those external individuals and organizations who contribute to or are impacted by our quality assurance processes. So people like external examiners, the quality review, peer reviewers who come to campus, and so on. So those externally who are involved in the peer review process. We wanted the self-evaluation to not only acknowledge the quality review processes and the impact that they had, but also to acknowledge ongoing quality improvement that happens within an institution. And we wanted to show, I suppose, if we could, a culture of ongoing quality enhancement and innovation within the university where we could. Because quality doesn't just happen at the threat of a quality assurance review of some description. It happens right throughout what we do as an institution. And lastly, we wanted to use the process to identify for ourselves priorities for our own future enhancement and development. And that was really crucial to us, that we use self-assessment valuably. So if I could reflect on our self-assessment, I suppose one of the things that I would say about the process in particular is that I believe that institutions can both meet the CINNTE objectives and also their own review goals simultaneously within the process. And what I mean by that is that you may want to use the review to surface a discussion and even get agreement in identifying the issues in which the institution needs to really think about in terms of effectiveness in relation to quality assurance. And self-assessment can help not only identify those, but get people's views and priorities in those. And I think that's incredibly valuable for an organization. I also think that self-assessment shines a light and increases awareness of actually the broad range of quality assurance activities that take place across the institution. And you will find, prior to doing self-assessment, that very few people within an organization understand and have insight to that very broad range of activities. So I think that, for example, was one of the goals that we wanted to get out of it. I think that there's, I also believe that comprehensive self-evaluation requires the safety of confidentiality. It requires a space where an institution can write down and articulate where it would like to improve. And I think that that happens best in a document that's not published. And I think we can all be rest assured that if there's anything interesting within the self-evaluation report, it will wind its way into a peer review group report somewhere, and that those who need to read about it will read about it somewhere in the process. But it would be my opinion that self-reflection is best within a confidential space with the peer review team and within the institution. I'd like to say that evidence-informed approaches can come from many sources, and not only in terms of new data gathering. So case studies, as Achim mentioned earlier, I think form evidence, real livable evidence. There is evidence that we collect all the time in terms of student survey information, index surveys, people who engage with the NSTEP process perhaps. outputs of reviews in relation to professional accreditation, outputs from reviews of research, bibliometric indicators, and so on. There's lots of evidence sitting around our institutions. We don't always have to collect new things as part of self-assessment. I want to say something about evidence-informed approaches and data analysis a little bit at the end as well. So, but I think largely the main value of effective assessment is that where an institution can self-identify their own areas for improvement, that's really what creates rich opportunities for engagement with the peer review team. And you can really direct in a little way the types of conversations that you will have. Otherwise, you're going to have a peer review team searching for things which they may never find, which are important that you do and want to talk about. And the last thing is about self-assessment templates. And again, this is one of the reasons I think for the variability in terms of the outputs within the report. There aren't at the moment a clear self-assessment template and chapters which institutions will follow. I think there are both, disadvantages to that, certainly when you're starting the process, but there are also advantages to that in terms of shaping the review that you need to shape, and talking about the things as an institution, having critically self-reflected, that you really need to talk about. I'm happy if anyone wants to get in touch with me to share my table of contents in relation to our self-assessment report, so you can see how we structured it. But I do think that there is value in really considering what you want to get out of the review and how you will structure your report accordingly. Just a few comments on engagement with the peer review team, because I think that that is obviously a really important part of the process. One of the most valuable things in terms of that element of the report was that I felt that the consultative model that we had with QQI in terms of thinking about the types of reviewers would best suit DCU as an institution, and the things that we believed that we needed to talk about in a review was very strong. And I really welcomed the opportunity to talk to QQI about the types of skills and experiences and institutions that were represented in relation to the development of the peer review team. The preparation meeting is key prior to the review, and we found it really valuable to listen very, very carefully to what the peer review group are talking about in that preparation and planning meeting, because then it helped us get the right people into the right rooms at the right time to address those questions which were clearly bubbling from their reading of our self-evaluation report, our AQRs, their training and briefing and so on. Inevitably, things get lost in translation during a peer review group visit. That can be for a whole range of reasons. It can be a question that's bubbling under from the peer review team that they never really get addressed in the way that they want to. And I think in our case, there was a question which we didn't really understand what the question was in order to address it properly. And I think that can happen a lot. And I appreciated as well during our review visit the useful and valuable input from our QQI liaison team with that regard, when we thought things may have been misinterpreted by the peer review team and so on. Another element of our visit was pre-briefing and debriefing. Now, that wasn't a way to provide people with a script to say to a review team, because that isn't going to get you very far in terms of addressing their questions. But it does help in terms of settling the nerves of people who are meeting with review teams, and then being able to debrief them around the key topics that are being addressed to potentially avoid that lost in translation piece, but also to prep teams going in about the types of things that might be discussed. And I felt that that was an important part of our process for the smooth visit. And then finally, just a comment, I suppose, on the review report and improvement planning. What we found was that there was a real mix of both quite specific and quite broad recommendations within the review. So hard sometimes to balance what was, they're all important, but some were huge and broad in scope and others quite specific, which could be dealt with quickly. The recommendations do inevitably reflect the interest, experience and expertise of your peer review team, another contributing factor for some of the richness and the diversity in terms of the recommendations. I'm a believer that a strong internal discussion and framing of an improvement plan is crucial, and there needs to be time within that. And also the ability to align recommendations within planning cycles, I think, can improve the capacity of institutions to be able to respond appropriately and with the appropriate level of gravitas in relation to recommendations. And I think that's a challenge for us all. Certainly our recommendations that aligned to our strategy are the most easiest for us to implement. And in terms of investment in improvement planning, and this is where I just want to comment on the information and communications piece, as it is a particular bugbear of mine as well. There is a real challenge for the higher education sector. We have an enormous amount of data and information that we hold, and it deserves debate in its own right. But after over a decade of underfunding within the sector, what isn't prioritised at the moment is investment in how we capture, store, manage the quality of, report on, analyse and so on information. It's a huge challenge, but it's one which is desperately underfunded within the sector. Also just in general investment for improvement planning does not typically fit within our current funding model. So those are my brief comments. I'm happy to answer questions at the end of this session, if that's useful.
Aisling, that was really amazing. I knew that this session would be so valuable and welcome. But honestly, that whistle-stop tour that you took us from the planning stages through to responding to the recommendations is really a rich illustration of an institution's experience. And there's one thing that you said there, particularly around the recommendations. You said what you're going to do about a recommendation will not crystallize itself in a few weeks. And I think that shows the importance of some reflection and the alignment of that activity with your own planning and review cycles. So it's really valuable input. Thank you. And I'm sure that the people, the listeners will have questions and so on. But what I'm going to do now, just to maintain the timing here, is to ask Dr. Brendan Ryder, who's Head of Academic Planning and Quality Assurance in Dundalk IT, to present to us their experience. And what we'll do is we'll have an opportunity to think about both presentations and maybe some short questions afterwards. Thanks, Aisling. Brendan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Irene. Can everybody see my presentation?
Yes, we can see it well. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Irene, and thanks for the introduction. As Professor Sheridan said, my name is Brendan Ryder. I'm the Head of Academic Planning and Quality Assurance at Dundalk Institute of Technology. I'm presenting today on behalf of the Vice President for Academic Affairs and Registrar, Dr. Sheila Flanagan, who unfortunately cannot be with us today. But if there are any particular issues that come up later on that I can't address, we certainly, between the two of us, certainly, you know, offline, we can try and deal with that. Just on behalf of DKIT, just to acknowledge and thank QQI for giving us the opportunity to present here and to share our experiences with the process to date. And just specifically just to thank Mairead and Marie and QQI for their assistance in the preparation for today on my side. And also just to thank Aisling as well from the conversations that I had with Aisling in DCU previously. Very interesting to hear what she had to say and her experiences around their review just in preparations as well, just to thank her for that as well. My points really are not, I've been asked to obviously give an institutional review here, and this, our own reflections or observations on our review. They're by no means exhaustive, but I suppose in terms of key reflections, key observations, things that, you know, due to the fact that it's mid-cycle in terms of the number of HEIs that have gone through the review, it will probably confirm a lot of what Aisling has said and also confirm what's in people's minds already for those who are about to who have already completed a cycle, but also maybe highlight some areas for those who haven't yet embarked or are embarking on or had the review just yet. So a little bit of background, as Aisling did, just in terms of our own review, and the process specifically, just broadly in terms of the process and our experiences at DKIT. And then just the second item that I was asked to address was the alignment with the findings of what's being considered today under the thematic analysis. And it's more confirmation, but there were some interesting points that I'll dovetail on that were made earlier. So I suppose again, we all know what the objective here is. It's to take stock. The review enables us to take stock of our provision, our programs, our research, how it's aligned to our mission, how effective it is, and so on. And we had, in our terms of reference that were defined, were defined under 5 objectives. The current quality assurance procedures. Objective 2 was around specific to the IoTs only, around the procedures for awarding. Objective 3, quality enhancement. Objective 4, ATP, and Objective 5, provision of programs to international learners. So our panel, again, we had 6 reviewers on our panel. Again, this is publicly available information, again, representative of the type of organisation, and was defined in relation to our profile and so on, in accordance with the guidance and in collaboration with QQI. Overall, in terms of the context for DKIT, and it'll be similar in other HEIs, we have an ambition framework that's an umbrella under which I suppose it drives everything that we do in terms of our strategic plan related to our HEI compact, our financial plans, our institutional review, obviously, and any other reviews that we have. So that's an overarching umbrella framework that we use to guide everything that we do within the institute. So in terms of the purpose of today, obviously, is to look at the broad observations and reflections. So just in terms of some key dates, I think we were one of the first, if not the first, to go through the first cycle. The key dates, we had our initial submission of the SER in the 3rd of September 2018. Our reviewer training and briefing session took place on the 15th of October 2018. Planning visit was in October 18 as well. Our main visit happened between the 3rd and 7th of December 2018, and then we had our publication of our review report and follow-up action plan in June 2018. And the documentation is there, as you know, on the QQI website, and is publicly available as well. So I suppose the main, point of today is to look at the process. And when I was reflecting on this, I suppose, in relation to the overall process, it's quite extensive. And Aisling has alluded to a lot of what I've spoken about here. But one of the main things for us within DKIT is, I suppose, the partnership approach that was taken, or the successful partnership approach that was undertaken by QQI in relation to their interaction with the provider, with DKIT in this case. And certainly for me and for the Institute, it has been an evolution of that partnership. And certainly if I was to think of 3 terms in terms of that relationship, during, before, during, and ongoing, of course, in relation to the review, 3 words: supportive, openness, and trust. And certainly, and that's a key pillar, and that has evolved even since our previous review in 2009. That has evolved quite significantly, and it's just a comment on that in terms of our own experiences with QQI. I think that's important to say that, and it certainly has, in terms of the work that has been done in terms of preparing us as an institute and preparing the sector as a whole. We have found that extremely valuable. And I suppose I just took a screenshot there of part of the handbook, the CINNTE handbook. I suppose the other thing that is done more broadly as well, and again with review on the QQI side and with the sector, is it's provided us with the scaffold to enable us to do an effective self-evaluation, which, as Aisling mentioned and others have mentioned, is a key part of what we're actually doing here. So I suppose that creates that environment, moving, I suppose, from that compliance culture to this enhancement and collaborative partnership approach. And certainly it's just to make a comment on that. And I think it's extremely important because it drove and set the scene for us more locally as well. When we actually came then to the actual self-evaluation process itself, which did enable us to do a systematic and evidence-based review overall. But essentially what it did do for us in its generic sense, but more tailored to DKT, was those processes and supports allowed us to basically think about our own structures, systems, processes, the people that are obviously involved with them, and ultimately as well the technology, everything that's involved around our QA, our QAE system, to enable us to do that. And it provided that lens to basically take stock of where we were, and to ensure that we were embedding that best practice. But just even mentioning, I mean, a very tangible way of really looking at that, and what it helped us to do was, and it's been mentioned earlier, some very interesting points made earlier about the relationship between the AQR and its input into the review. It allowed us, and how we actually make sure that we layer and have integrated reporting. How do we use the reporting mechanisms that we do and make sure that they're not siloed, that they're actually integrated and brought forward, and that ultimately the output comes as part of an institutional review. And that also helped us to look at what has also been mentioned earlier, was the data, the evidence base, and particularly around the data. And I suppose I have a specific point around the data later, but in terms of how we gather that and how we actually deal with it. What it also allowed us to do was, I suppose, in the context of AQR and ultimately the review and the reporting internally within the organisation, it was a trigger for us to look at how we link our various reporting outputs internally as well, and ultimately link everything together with the AQR and ultimately report out any outcomes in the institutional review. So it really informed our thinking of how we build that quality culture as well. That did help with that, because what it also allowed us to do was, it allowed us to, I suppose, by explaining the relationship between why are we doing what we're doing internally within the schools and departments, you invariably build that quality culture. You build that what Irene referred to as the internally driven culture. People can see the benefit of actually producing or reporting in at a program board level, for example, and how that feeds in ultimately then to the AQR, and then how that ultimately feeds in then to the institution review. People began to see why you were doing it. It wasn't just doing a reporting for the sake of reporting. So all of that allowed us, I suppose, together with the framework and through the CINNTE handbook and the various resources, allowed us to start there, do our gap analysis, as we would typically, and what we all do, and then identify those areas for improvement. So I suppose overall, in terms of the current process as it stands, for us, it did exactly what it was intended to do, and certainly we got the benefit from that. Just some specific reflections around, just generally speaking, again, this is not exhaustive, as I said, but again, just some key points here. And some of these are obvious, but sometimes obvious points are the ones that we need to pay attention to. And none of us will do this, but don't underestimate the time that the review will take. Obviously, it's on a timeline and so on, but once it's embedded within the organisation, you know, it does take a considerable amount of time at all levels and at all stages. It's important also, and this has been alluded to previously, but it's important that the work undertaken in the review is aligned with your existing structures, governance and otherwise. Supplement them as appropriate, but again, you know, be proportional in what you do. Make it part of what the normal operation, because that's ultimately what you want to do. Any review activity that you do, you want it to be part of the normal operation, not something that's out in a silo, and setting up separate structures around that. But by all means, supplement it then as appropriate. We had working groups, as others, as Aisling had in DCU, and others will have steering groups and working groups who were established across the various areas. It worked very well. We had very good buy-in across the organisation. It was challenging at times to gather the evidence. Absolutely, it certainly was. We got there at the end, but again, it was just a general point about structuring. Aisling's mentioned consulting widely. Again, we would have consulted. We identified in similar way, I suppose, principles around who we were going to consult with, student, staff. Involved our academic councils, school meetings, programme committees, student representatives, and so on. We undertook staff surveys, a staff survey as part of it as well, and we also held a number of special academic council meetings as well. Again, just which kind of feeds into the next point around communications, but again, keeping everybody in the loop. Very important to develop a communication strategy as well. We got a particular recommendation around, it did indicate that we did consult widely, but there was concern around a lack of a central communication clearinghouse, as the panel described it. Now, we've addressed that now, but again, it was something. It wasn't something that was obvious to us at the time, and that's tied into the quality culture piece as well. That people are, it's part of the normal business of what you're doing, but you may just be punctuating it now with particular highlights or milestones as you're going through the timeline that has been agreed with QQI in terms of review, and everybody feels part of it, that it's not just something that happens. There's a couple of, the site visit and that's it, and everybody just walks away from it then after that. Aisling mentioned the templates or exemplars, and I would concur with that point. I know specifically the handbook and the guidance that has been provided by QQI doesn't necessarily stipulate that, and for good reason, that the institutes are diverse. But I think templates or exemplars certainly would be useful, and I think they would have helped, but certainly, and it does, as I say, concur with the point that Aisling made. The next 2 points really revolve around, I suppose, the point I made about data, indirectly, specifically around data, but we got a recommendation around, and it's one of the key things that the ISR should be evaluative, more evaluative than descriptive in nature. And certainly, and I think it's related to point 7 there, not necessarily exclusively, but what we found difficult, I suppose, was that in terms of gathering the evidence, and we were challenged by the amount of data to gather and pull together for the review. It was done and it was completed, but I think you must make sure that sufficient resources are deployed internally to deal with the data or the evidence base. I think for us, it probably had a slight impact then on what we produced in terms of it was less evaluative than it could have been. It was evaluative, but not as evaluative as it could have been. And one impact of that was the amount of time that was spent gathering, getting the data, looking at it, determining what it was actually saying, and doing something with it. But I think it's part of that broader point that Aisling made as well around, I suppose, national support around capture, share, manage, and analysing of data. And I know, for example, typically in universities, there would be institutional research offices that would assist with that. Certainly within the IoT sector, certainly that wouldn't normally be the case, but it is something, again, that we are addressing locally, and I know other IoTs are doing so as well. But I think, and it's all part of, I suppose, a systematic approach to how you deal with your data. And it is tied in ultimately with how you do, and that layered integrated reporting that I referred to earlier, because it's all related ultimately, all of that together. Once you explain why you're doing what you're doing, that helps with the buy-in and helps with the building of that quality culture. Again, a minor point, but again, I mentioned the action support and scaffolding that was provided by QQI. Certainly, absolutely. But again, just to review the interactions then more specifically, there was probably a particular point, probably towards the end, that certainly additional interaction would be needed. But again, as I say, that's a minor point. So I suppose broadly, they're just some I suppose they're not exhaustive, as I say. There's some general observations that we found. We found the process overall assisted us hugely in terms of scaffolding what we did, and allowed us to conduct our self-assessment then in an effective way, and not just in an effective way for us as an organisation to look at what we're doing and how can we do it better. And tied in with that, I suppose, is using, I suppose, that layered or integrated reporting mechanism to actually get buy-in then to build that quality culture. And then as a sideline to that, then it's highlighted the importance of that data function and the importance of having data and being agile in terms of how we use our data, be it for an institutional review or otherwise. The second thing, just to comment on really, and I suppose we could spend the remainder of the day was looking at the alignment to the findings here. Really, it's just a confirmation. Really, I note this morning when Achim was presenting that the items, just to concur with the items, that the first 5 items in terms of confirmation that certainly, yes, our report definitely did confirm alignment to what is presented in the report and what was communicated this morning, absolutely, around the process, compliance with the European standards and guidelines, governance structures, ATP, and the international students aspects. So I suppose that's just by way of confirmation. In terms of the challenges, certainly, again, how did they relate to DKIT? Yes, the efficiency of governance structures around committees and how they work. There's certainly no silver bullet here, but again, that would have been specifically mentioned at DKIT. There was a specific concern around duplication of roles within our subcommittee structure of Academic Council. And that's something that we review on an ongoing basis, but certainly in terms of this recommendation, it's something that we're taking a hard look at now at the moment. And trying to build something into the system that we do review of committees on a regular basis rather than doing it on a triggered basis, say, in relation to a particular review. The second concern around or challenge that was identified earlier was maintaining sets of policies. And again, we have exactly the same issue. We would have had some commentary around the number of policies and procedures, and that was mentioned earlier this morning as well. And certainly that's a challenge for us. Sometimes it's a gap in terms of identifying a policy that's not there, but equally then where policies need to be rationalised or reviewed. Now, we do review policies like we all do within the sector, but there was a feeling that further rationalisation on that front was needed. And the last point around how you implement those policies consistently, absolutely. And again, it certainly is a challenge for us. And it's something that again that I'm not going to venture on a solution to it now, just due to the time. But certainly, it's something that that we are very well aware of and was mentioned specifically again in terms of our own review. And I suppose as a general point, what we do, and we're very good in the sector, a collaborative approach to addressing these challenges certainly would be welcomed. We do that, I think, through various fora within the sector, be it with QQI, through webinar, through our own internal meetings and external meetings that we have with various function heads and so on, be it quality or otherwise. And I think identifying those and sharing practice certainly would be welcomed from DKIT side. I think that's me. So thank you very much.
Brendan, thank you very much. Honestly, that was so interesting. And I want to thank both yourself and Aisling for such an insightful and honest presentation in terms of what you've experienced. And I know that'll be really useful to the people who are listening today. I want to go back now just to both of you, please, if you just stay with me. There's a little bit there in terms of the commentary, particularly around the self-evaluation report. And what I've taken from the questions are there's kind of two key points. One is around the structuring of that and the various structures that different institutions have taken in order to present it. And the other thing is around something that you said, and I think you both spoke about the structure of that report, but you Aisling, also mentioned, and I think if you're starting as an institution down this road, that's where the real work is. You know, that report is where the heavy lifting is done, but it's also where the real value can be in the longer term for that institution. But it is scary, and it is you're kind of walking off a cliff a little bit in terms of the honesty and the trust. So you spoke a little bit, Aisling, as well about the confidentiality of that, and that's been mentioned in the comments. So I just wonder if you would either both of you like to have another word around that.
Sure. I suppose in terms of structuring the actual report, it was something that we thought about right at the very beginning. And like I think many other institutions may have done as well, we took the view that aligning it to this, telling the story, I suppose, in line with how the ESG and how the QQI core guidelines were structured, made for the perspective of a peer review team a logical progression where you start with the governance structures and the high level overview. You tell the story of the learning experience, both within the classroom and learner supports. You move on then to the research activities and research programs and so on, almost so that there's a logical journey which aligns itself to the European standards and guidelines, or indeed the QQI guidelines. So that framed the broad structure. Internally, though, it was really important for us to structure the review around the terms, which are an effectiveness of our processes and procedures. And internally, a lot of the discussions that we would have had were that staff were concerned that, is this a review of my unit? But everybody gets reviewed all together. And we had to be very clear that it was not a review of what we do every day, but a review of the structures, processes and procedures that support us from a quality assurance perspective in doing those. And that actually that discussion had to be ongoing as we went through the process of self-assessment to ensure that we had the correct framework for the review, because it's very easy to get into the quality of your student support services, the quality of your teaching and learning, the quality of your research, and you have to lift yourself constantly just back from that a little bit. In terms of just confidentiality, I'd be interested in what others have to say on that. Like for me, having a confidential self-assessment does not take away from the transparency of the process at all. It just facilitates what is a fashionable phrase these days, a kind of a safe space in which to really explore and to have a frank and honest conversation internally and to be able to articulate that in a particular way. I think that if we published our self-assessment report, there would be a tendency, and I can only speak for myself, I would have a tendency to have created a brochure about quality assurance at DCU as opposed to an honest, deep and quite frank self-reflection. And I think if I had produced that brochure of quality assurance, I don't think we would have been able to have the type of deep, quite rich conversation with the peer review team. Okay. Because they wouldn't have had insights to the areas where we really did want to improve on our broad quality journey. So.
Thanks very much, Aisling. Thank you. Brendan, have you anything to add around the structure of that SER or the confidentiality?
Yeah, I think the first point, I mean, both points are well made. I think we took a similar approach in terms of the ESG, and then obviously aligned it then to the terms of reference. So that's essentially what we did, and it does work well. In terms of confidentiality, it's not something I identified specifically, but I take the point. I agree with Aisling's point that certainly it doesn't take away from the effectiveness of it.
Yeah.
But certainly it's not something that I highlighted or mentioned there. But it's a valid point.
Okay, thank you both very much. I just like to Marie Gould, I know, wants to come in. Marie, do you want to come in there?
Thanks, Irene. Actually, I just wanted to come in on those more practical aspects around, I suppose, the templates and exemplars. And Ashley mentioned this at the start, that we don't have a template for the ICER, and that there's pros and cons. It can become a very templated process. But you did mention, and I mean, I think the debate about publication, QQI's position that we would very much encourage the institutions to publish, and we're not opening up that debate today. But we absolutely appreciate the different institutional perspectives on that. But I think the sharing the table of contents page is a great idea. So I mean, it's something that we can certainly develop as a resource. Is different. We can develop some exemplars of ICERs now that we have we have 10. I mean, since Achim's report, we now have 10 CINNTE review processes that are near complete. We're just finalising the report on our 10th. So we have a range, I suppose, of exemplars there. So we could. I think come up with some exemplar table of contents or templates, which would be very helpful, so that they can be as a resource, so that at least it gives institutions some place to start. It's just a little bit of a roadmap of the journeys, the different approaches that their peers would have taken. So I mean, that's something QQI that we can certainly take on board from today's discussion, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, there's an opportunity there for you to facilitate that process, but I think the institutions as well are well able to share with each other. So there's an opportunity there. There's just one more thing I want to ask you about. It's about this. Aisling, you mentioned this lost in translation. And I think that stirred up a comment which was around whether there's a meaningful opportunity to debrief with the panel in order to clarify an institution's understanding of their observations or recommendations. I'm not sure that's entirely what you meant in terms of lost in translation, that it was at that end game where the recommendations are being considered. But if there was anything that you wanted to add about that, we have just a moment.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it is in a way kind of delicate territory as well for an institution, because the review panel, who are doing their best and with significant expertise and experience themselves, are coming to an institution which they don't know, and how things are structured within that organization, which they're not entirely familiar with, and so sometimes whenever staff are explaining, I suppose, an approach, they can pick up on inconsistencies which are actually just more a description of an individual's viewpoint rather than an inconsistency in an approach. That's just an example, for instance.
No, I appreciate that.
I would say that our engagement with our review team did provide an opportunity, multiple opportunities indeed, for us to be able to try again with an answer to satisfactorily address an issue that they were exploring. But largely that would have happened from our own pre-briefing and debriefing of people. Yeah. So if members had been in a review visit saying, there's this issue which I don't think we addressed properly in this meeting about student engagement and student feedback, we would talk to the review team and say, have you had that issue addressed satisfactorily? And if they said no, we would suggest to them, well, would it be helpful if our Dean of Teaching and Learning, or would you like to meet with our registrar in order to discuss that issue specifically? So I would have found the review team, along with support from QQI in that regard, helpful in terms of trying to address and to make sure that things didn't get lost in translation. And then a recommendation which, when in its reading, you would say to yourself, but we already have that. We already do that. So
that's great. Listen, thank you both. I just, in terms of the commentary, it would seem, and I think it's probably clear from the conversation too, that the self-evaluation report really is the institution's own hard work, and that an overly kind of structured template might not really give the institution the opportunity to personalize that. But having said that, the idea of a guided set of contents that just kind of gives us the hints, I think would be found useful. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask Dr. Achim Hopbach if he would just like to make any commentary based on the input from the two experiences, I suppose, that we've had of the providers.
Sure. Thanks a lot. I should start by saying that this was extremely interesting for me, and partly it reaffirmed what I found out. With my I would like to start with the templates. Well, templates for self-evaluation, that's a topic as old as external quality assurance, I would say. In my experience on Mondays, the universities in Germany criticized me when I was the director there for being overly bureaucratic and prescriptive, and all these things. And on Tuesdays they called again and asked me for more templates and templates and templates. That's the way how it is. It is true. In one of the comments it was mentioned that that templates would lead to a more homogeneous approach. It is true, and this would just as on a side note, would make the work of somebody easier who has to write a thematic analysis. But this is not what these self-evaluation reports are for. I have never been a big fan of these templates. I think giving some guidance giving some examples. That would be much better than working with templates. Why so? I liked very much what Aisling talked about, the self-evaluation. There was one comment which is of particular relevance for this review scheme. And this is that with the self-evaluation report, you can shape the review and shape the site visit. And here it comes in that you should be a bit more evaluative than only descriptive. It is true. If you don't put, let's say, interesting things in there, you won't get anything out of the site visit. If a site visit turns into a fact-finding mission, it is boring for everybody, for the panel, for the university. So being self-critical creates only the potential that the institution can get something out of such a review. And this is particularly relevant for the CINNTE review. And I'm coming back to the link between this review and the annual reporting. I think this combination could be exploited even more to use maybe even more than it is currently the case, the data and information coming from the annual report and focusing this review even more on critical policy topics. And I got the impression from these two interventions that the culture that is behind this review, that is these reviews are done in a collaborative way. There's a lot of trust. There's a partnership approach that paves the way for having such kind of review, doing the, let's say, boring stuff more in the annual reporting and focusing this review on the critical policy issues. And this would make it easier to be self-critical for the universities. Two very short comments. What was that? Oh yes, on the recommendations. This is true. They are very diverse as well, and maybe the panels should have a bit more guidance on this topic, having very broad recommendations. I mean, what is the university doing with a very broad recommendation? They have to address it, making some follow-up reports, but that doesn't make a lot of sense. And the last point from Brandon, that a collaborative approach to addressing the challenges, that's very interesting, and that's I would say the most interesting lesson I learned in the last couple of years in external quality assurance, that collaborative learning on the side of the institutions is in many cases much more effective than the impact of an individual review. So this might really be a path QQI could follow to have more collaborative follow-up of a round of reviews. And Ireland has a good basis for this. It's not 400 universities, it's a rather small number. So these collaborative approaches based on this review scheme might be very interesting for Ireland. These were some short comments.
That's great. Thank you very much, Achim. It's absolutely true. We are, a relatively small system, even though we are diverse, and we have a lot to learn from each other. Now, again, I'm very strictly keeping to the time. So what I want to do is I just want to say really that there's a lot to reflect on from what we've heard this morning. It's important to think about how the process that you undergo is aligned with strategic planning, with internal reviews, and also important to think how it's aligned with the annual institutional quality review, how the institution actually maximizes what they get out of it. Whatever about the agency, how the institution going through this process maximizes the output for that institution, both operationally, but also in terms of ambition and strategy and so on. The importance of quality assurance and quality enhancement of research as well as of teaching and learning has come across. The importance of ensuring that the self-evaluation reports are truly honest, open and evaluative in nature, and the importance of alignment of objectives with the institutional strategy, not separate directions, but on the same track to create a quality culture that really transcends everything that we do. The importance of internal communications, maintenance of a multiplicity of policies and consistency in implementation of those policies. And these are all really important learnings, I think, for all of us at any stage in the process. But to bring today's proceedings to a close, I would like to thank Dr. Hopbach, Aisling McKenna, and Dr. Brendan Ryder for their really generous contributions, and for all of the attendees for being part of the process this morning, for your questions and prompts. And I would also like to pay particular tribute to the QQI team and the work that they invest in this process. And I've seen from the other side, the way that they walk this journey with each provider from the beginning right through to the publication of the report at the end. And I think their role in it is really important and really much appreciated. So I think it's Brendan or Marie who would like to close out.
If Pádraig is here, I'm going to ask Pádraig, but just
I'm not sure if he's back.
To say thank you so much to Irene for chairing the event, to Achim for his report and reflections, really informative. And I've read that report on a number of occasions, but still found this that I learn, and I think you learn so much more from the verbal feedback and presentations than the reading. So really informative. And to Aisling and Brendan for their really valuable insights, a lot of reflections and food for thought for us, some really constructive actions that we can certainly follow up on quite quickly. And further reflections. So and also in the chat, I suppose, for colleagues who contributed and to discussion in the chat. So yeah, I mean, a very, very useful morning from our perspective and enjoyable. So so thank you for that. But I'm not sure. I know Pádraig had to go to a meeting. Whether he is.
He's back.
Take it away, Pádraig.
Yeah. No, I went away to deal with great matters of state. I would have preferred to stay here, to be honest. One of the challenges of Teams is if you have two meetings going on at the same time, you keep getting the conversation, the chat gets pinged across both of them. So I was actually getting a lot of that coming through. What's even worse is if you're trying to put the chat in yourself on another one, is that all of the responses keep writing over what you're trying to type, so it can be quite challenging. It was great to have had, and thanks a million to Achim again. I think part of the thing that comes out of out of this process is the importance of getting verbal contact that people have. And I mean, I know from Brendan and from Ashley, I know for a long time that interventions, the oral intervention is very important as part of this process, and it's why visits work quite well. You can do a lot with documents, and people have moved away and looked at metric-based systems and trying to do everything on paper. It doesn't work. There's no substitute. The number of times I've said that it is impossible to spend 3 days lying to an external review team, they will find out. So it's not worth it, and it's not what people do. People, I'm always very impressed at the end of these processes, and when I was involved in organising them from inside, at how well an external body had really picked up things, noting the challenges of having to explain, even within the same system, how difficult the difficult things are. It's been great to have had Irene chairing this as well, because she's a key member of our board and a member of the Approval and Reviews Committee, and working in an institution she's in that has just been established or amalgamated. She has a really good understanding of the dynamics of how we've worked on this. So there's been a lot of chat has come through here that has been very helpful, and we're going to continue to build on that and to tweak and adjust this process, and make sure, as we do on all of this, that the outputs of this report are fed out to not just the national but the international side. Achim will know that the biggest challenge in the European standards and guidelines on a single standard is around thematic analysis. It's something that a lot of agencies struggle with, and I want to commend Marie for the work that she's done on this. But of itself, it's of little use without the institutional support that's been involved. So to thank everybody for that. Can I just ask Brian and Karina and Mairead and Marie if they'd stay on at the end of this, so I don't have to, just something else I wanted to feed back to them. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks all. Have a good weekend.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.